were, well, they're both killing each other, but in the country, they weren't welcome anymore. So they were pushing them towards what was then Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. So you had mass out-migration of people that were no longer welcome in their own country, who knew if they stayed, were going to die.
Richard Nolan, thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Nice to finally meet you. Bill mentioned you when he was on the show, and you have a very interesting story. So
Yeah, that was a good guy.
You are currently a health, safety, and environmental manager in a top 10 construction company in Canada. You served for 27 years in the military, and you've had 3 different trades during that time. You spent time in Germany. You were deployed in Africa, Honduras, Bosnia, and Afghanistan. You drove tanks in Germany. You were a med tech in Rwanda, Bosnia, and Honduras. And you were a military engineer in Afghanistan. Very impressive. Very impressive. How did you get started in the military? Was it something you were always interested in?
So I enlisted when I was 16 in going to school, St. Paul's in Gander, Newfoundland. The recruiters came in when we were in grade 10, and they said there's a 2-year wait list at the time to join the military in Newfoundland. So it was very smart of them. They went in and said, if you don't know what you're going to do when you're 18, why don't you sign up now? You can't legally enlist, but you can sign up for the wait period. So I signed up when I was 16 as something to do. When I turned 18, I was working for my father, who owned, at the time it was called Metropole Courier, and long before the internet days, he delivered the bank mail in Newfoundland. He had the whole central run. So one crew did Avalon, one did the West Coast, and we did all of Central. So when I got my driver's license, I went to work for Dad at Metropole Courier, and I drove every morning up to the airport at like 5:30, 6 o'clock, met the airplane, picked up all the bank mail for several of the communities around Gander, as far as like Glenwood, Glovetown, stuff like that. And then I would drive out, drop all the mail off, drive back to Gander, and later on in the evening, go back out, pick up the outgoing mail, come back, meet the plane at the airport, and go on again. And this was all great. And then Dad came to me one day and said, my 10 kids are all old enough now to be out on their own. Your mom and I want to retire. We're buying a retirement place out in Eastport, and you're going to start looking for a job. And I was like, oh, that sucks. And the next day, my phone rang, and it was recruiters. Your 2-year wait list is up. I mean, the next day. My entire life has been that way. I don't know if it's good or bad, but something happens, wheels come off it over here, phone rings, hey, there's an opportunity over there. And even my entire military career, where I've gone and what I've done, has always been, oh, this is looking bad. And then all of a sudden something great comes out of it, and I'll capitalize on it and go in a different direction. Thus, the 3 different trades while I was in the military. But no, they called me and they said, come on in. And I went in and did an interview. And yeah, a couple of weeks later, I was on a plane heading to Cornwallis, Nova Scotia to do basic training. I figured I would do it for my 3 years, figure out what I wanted to do, get some experience, and then go on. And I absolutely loved it. And of course, they posted me in Germany for my first 4 years. There's not a kid out there that, 18-year-olds from Newfoundland showing up in Germany. I don't think I came home for 3.5 years. It was crazy. It was really good. It was a good time.
So you were stationed in Germany.
Yeah,
I'm sure tearing it up with your friends.
Yes. Yeah, we worked hard. It was about 7 months of the year we were in the field. We were driving Leopard tanks and gunning them and stuff. So there's a lot of tactics involved, a lot of maintenance, and so we were constantly training. But when you train hard, you're rewarded hard. So the way it worked with us was, for every week we spent in the field, we'd get 1 free day off. So if you spent 4 weeks in the field, you came home. The commanding officer usually had the powers to give you a couple extra days, a little gift or whatnot. So he would end up, on a month-long exercise, you'd come back, you'd probably get 10 days of vacation time afterwards that didn't cost you anything. Then you throw a bit of your own vacation time on top of it. So every big deployment always ended up with a huge vacation afterwards. So Holland, I've been to Amsterdam 7 or 8 times. I don't remember being to Amsterdam, but I've been there 7 or 8 times. I've been all over Europe. I actually felt bad because by the time I was 22, 23 years old, I could freehand you a sketch of Europe, all the different countries and where they are, and how long it takes to drive from this place to that place. But I couldn't tell you one town in Newfoundland other than Gander. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know my own province, but I knew Europe quite well. Yeah, it was fantastic. And the group of friends that I made over there, I still have a Signal chat group with the majority of them. And yeah, that's not something that the public should ever be exposed to. It's quite comical, but everybody's still 18 on this chat group. Like they're all just kids.
It's important for everyone to have some chat group with buddies so they can
Absolutely.
blast be
Yeah. Yeah.
sure, never be seen by anyone. But
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I've got a few of them, but that one is probably by far the funniest.
awesome. So you're stationed in Germany. Were you being deployed from Germany into other locations?
So early on in Germany, Bosnia broke out, and we got the call to go as an armored squadron to assist. And we painted all of our green vehicles white because it was under the UN badge at the time. And then that deployment got shut down. So actually, in my first 4 years, they do consider the posting to Germany to be a deployment, a NATO deployment, but I don't really consider it a deployment as such. It was way too much fun to be a deployment, but we never actually went anywhere for those 4 years. We did a lot of training. We did a lot of call up, stand up, wait, and then got shut down. It didn't go. So I didn't actually get my first military deployment until I came back from Germany and changed trades out of armored corps into the medical trade. And I think I graduated from the medical trade maybe 4 days, and I got a call, pack your stuff, you're going to Africa on Friday. And this was Monday. So it was a pretty tight turnaround.
You mentioned so you changed trades, you were in the armor division, and you went into the medical side. What caused that? Was it organic?
No, what it was, so a couple of different things. First of all, I was kind of looking at the military to be a stepping stone into a civilian career early on in my life. And in the Armored Corps, what they don't tell you is every hour of driving a tank requires 6 to 7 hours of tank maintenance. And if you're a heavy equipment operator listening to this right now, you know that is brutal. It is brutal. So by the time I was 22, 23, my knees were cracking, my lower back was cracking, I was sore all the time. And I remember my first time coming home for Christmas, I think it was 93 or something like that. I was home for Christmas, and I got up off the couch, and both my knees went click, click. The back deck of a tank is 6 feet up. And they tell you use 3 points of contact, but you don't when you're 18. You jump off the back and you carry on. And you do that 10, 15, 20 times a day. It takes its toll. And my mom commented on my knees, and I was like, that's just normal. Everybody I know has knees like that. And she's like, that's not normal for a 23-year-old, which got me thinking. And my crew commander, crew commander is the person that's assigned the ownership of that tank, that call sign. And there's 20 or 30 tanks in the squadron, and each one has its own person that looks after that tank at different ranks and different positions. However, my crew commander, I would have ballparked him to be about 50, 55 years old. You spend your entire life what we call hatches up. So you're actually, the top half of your body is sticking out the top of the tank. You're exposed to the wind, the rain, the sun, whatever it is, your face is eating that. Well, he had a birthday, and they brought out a cake, and the cake said 35 on it. And I immediately went, I'm leaving this trade. I am not going to be looking 55 years old with little slits for eyes because of the wind and the rain and everything pouring down on you, and my back and my knees and stuff. I just said, no, you know what? There is no civilian equivalent to a tank driver. Maybe in Los Angeles with the battering ram guy, and probably not today because they burnt that city to the ground. So there was only one or two options for a tanker afterwards. And I'm like, oh, you know what? That's way too big of an odds I felt like I was wasting my time at that point in time. So I had about 4 years in, I applied for a change of trades, which we called at the time a lot rep. And I was trying to go search and rescue. So I was loving search and rescue to get in it in the military. I tried really hard. I did all the courses. I did, civilian jump course, dive courses, all that stuff. And I went through the application process, and they take 500 applicants. And of 500 applicants, you are graded from 1 to 500, and they accept 24 people. The course runs 12. So there's 12 on the course, 12 backup in case they lose somebody, and then the rest are better luck next time. So the first time I applied, I was number 33. And the personnel selections officer, the PSO, she told me I did a phenomenal job. I interviewed really, really well. She said that I was the type of person that they wanted to see come in because when I interview you, you're interested in helping people. When I interview a lot of other people that want to get into SAR, they're interested in what can I do to make myself look good. You know what I mean? Like it's more about I want to be SAR because that's a cool thing. And she said, you want to be SAR because you really like helping other people. And that's
looking for compassion.
yes. Yeah. And not cowboys. They don't want cowboy in SAR because the cowboy is the guy that's going to put his life in danger, even if he's trying to help somebody else. Then you have 2 injured people instead of 1. So I tried it, and I of course was unsuccessful. And the PSO said, we take 60 to 70% of our SAR from the medical trade because the last third of the course is all medicine. The first 2/3 teach you how to get to the injured person, the downplane, the whatever, and then the last third is how to treat them. So if you already have that, that's when we're doing our assessments, that gives you a big leg up. And she said, we were looking for 64 med techs right now. So I opted to try med tech and go through that training and then go back at SAR afterwards. So funny enough, one of those weird stories where I'm in the right place at the right time, I signed up for med tech, or medic, what we call medic, and they were having a problem in the medical world. Um, the young junior guys, no matter what company you're in, if there's crap work to be done, your most junior guy is going to be knees deep in that, right? I mean, you don't have the president or CEO out there, shoveling mud. It's the young guy that's out there doing that. So what was happening was the med course, the initial course was like 3 or 4 weeks long. You just did some very basic medical training, and then they assigned you to a crew where you spent the next 4 years learning medicine from people that were well established in the trade. And then after 4 years, you went and did the next medical course, which was another 5 or 6 weeks in Borden. And that's how you did your career progression through 20 years. A little bit of knowledge and a lot of on-the-job training. What was happening was they were sending these guys with a little bit of knowledge to do, say, medical coverage at the range or the jump range. So the Herc would fly over and 200 Canadian airborne would jump out the back of it, and the guy sitting there to look after him had 3-week medical course. So if you thunder in, uh, you don't want to see 22-year-old Richard standing over there. You want to see 54-year-old warrant officer so and so, like he knows how to fix it and quickly. So they said, we got to address this. So they started this, they revamped the program and did what they call Super Threes. So your first course is TQ3, your second is TQ5, or it was back in the day. They changed those names every 3 or 4 years just to make it more confusing for everybody. But my TQ3 was a year long, and it was basically a 4-year university course condensed into a year with a 100% pass rate. So if you got a 97 on exam, you had to rewrite it. And their logic at the time was, if we make the pass mark 80, what 20% do you not need to know when you're kneeling over a guy with a hole in his chest?
Makes a lot of sense.
It did make a lot of sense. After our course, they did put it back to 80 because it was just too difficult to do the 100% thing. But we spent a year, and if you're not familiar with the term physician's assistant, in the United States, a PA is a really big help in the healthcare community. And the trade I used to be in has now morphed into PAs for Canada, and our PAs are now starting to work out in the public sector. So a lot of oil rigs have a PA on it instead of a physician. Can't get a physician to go to an oil rig, but you can get a PA. A lot of our hospitals are starting to use them as well, and it's a big leg up. There's a lot of really skilled people out there, but so I digress. I went on this year-long course, and I got posted to Petawawa, just outside Ottawa, in '94. And when you get posted to a new place, they give you 7 days off. So you land, And that 7 days, you track down wherever your furniture and all your belongings are in the moving company. You find a place to live. You arrange the moving company to bring it there, and you get 7 days to settle in. If you require more than that, you just go talk to your boss there at work and whatever. So it was a Monday. I think I got there on a Saturday, and on a Monday, I just swung by my unit lines. I was in civilian clothes. I just wanted to go in and just say I'm here, and I'll be here next week. And I heard my name mentioned from an office, and I tapped on the door and stuck my head in. They'd never seen me before. Can I help you? And I said, "Oh, just heard my name. I'm Corporal Nolan." And they go, "Oh, pack your shit. You're going to Rwanda. You're going to Africa on Friday." And I was like, "I don't have this stuff. Everything I own, everything you've issued me is in a sea can somewhere, come like trucking its way to Petawawa." And he said, "Go down to the quartermaster, temporary draw everything you need, and pack it up, and be here tomorrow morning in uniform." So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we packed up, and on Friday, I was in the belly of a Russian Aleutian, which is their version of our Herc, and it was obviously through the lowest bidder because I was terrified for 3 days in this thing while we puddle jumped over to Africa, and it was an absolutely nightmare of a flight. The after action was never ever use this company ever again. The pilot was smoking a cigarette while he was fueling up the plane, and yeah, so it was terrifying. But yeah. But I was advanced party. I was like first one to go in, and definitely worth its while. But anyhow, the course was really good. I learned a lot, and it was so funny because there were so many things on the course that the doctors and nurses that were teaching us would be like, "Well, today we're going to learn how to do an emergency birthing. So if you're in a place and there's no hospital around, nobody, and you need to deliver a baby, we're going to teach you how to do it today." And I mean, they had all the dolls and everything that you birthed a baby covered with some crazy gel, just like it was the real meal deal. And they always followed it up with, "But don't worry, you're never going to use this in real life." And then I got on a plane and went to Africa. And everything I learned in the last year, including delivering babies, I did while I was in Africa. And so I turned out to love the trade and didn't go back after SAR. I stayed in the trade in that trade for another 10 years before the actual trade itself changed, and it changed dramatically. What ended up happening was a young corporal gave an older warrant officer some Sudafed who came to the clinic complaining of sinuses. If we didn't hand it out for free, he would have went down to like Shoppers or Lawtons and bought his own Sudafed. But he had an underlying heart condition, and when he took it, he had a heart episode. He didn't die or anything, but he had a heart episode that they linked to the Sudafed. They linked the Sudafed to the young corporal who gave it to him, and then they said, "All right, no more corporals giving out Sudafed. Now you got to have a 2-year pharmacy course to give out an aspirin." So I'd been to Africa. I pulled bullets out of kids, and I sewn fingers back on, and now I can't hand out an aspirin. So I went to my boss and I said, "Look, I'm not staying in this trade. I'm not staying in this job. I feel now like I'm absolutely useless, and I am not going to be useless." And he said, "Why don't you take your commission, become an officer, and come work at the unit as an officer?" So that's what I did. And I think it was 2003. I flipped over to engineering. It took 2 years to go through the officer training and then the engineer training. And that was here I was posted here in the East End to, at the time, 56 Engineer Squadron, which grew into 37 Combat Engineer Regiment. And I stayed there from 2000. Well, I got there in '99, but I was their medic, and I stayed there till 2016, where I left after making it to be the commanding officer. So I showed up as a corporal and left as the CO. It was an absolutely incredible journey, and it was funny too because the commanding officer would be much like the CEO of its own company. You take care of all the discipline, you take care of all the finance, make sure the budget's balanced, make sure the training schedule is what we need to do to meet our goals, and yada yada yada. When you're a corporal, all you do is dick around. So I was a corporal for the first 4 years in the unit, and I mean, I made such good friends with everybody. But I was one of the Friday night downtown George Street. What kind of trouble can we get in? And then a few years later, I'm an officer, so I can't really do that as much as I could before. But you're still a young lieutenant. You get into a little bit of trouble here and there. And then start going up higher and higher and higher, and you realize, well, now the people that I like to have a beer with on a Friday night are actually answering to me, and I have to, if they step out of line, I got to be the one to bring them back in the line. So you kind of lose those ways. Yeah. So in '16, when I retired, um, it was after 2016, and only probably in the last couple of years that I really reconnected with a lot of the guys, and we joke about it all the time because now I'm right back to being a corporal in my head. The officer time was fun, and I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. I developed a lot of really good leadership skills and management skills. But there's nothing more fun than having no responsibility at all. Just have somebody else tell you what to do, you go do it, and then you.
I remember life before kids.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was very.
If we could step back for a minute, when you were in Africa, what was your job there?
So when we deployed to Africa, the Hutus and Tutsis were in a full-on genocidal war. We went over to set up a field hospital on top of the mountain. What was happening was the Rwandan people were being pushed out. The Tutsis were being pushed out. No, the Hutus were being pushed out. Tutsis were, well, they were both killing each other, but in the country, they weren't welcome anymore. So they were pushing them towards what was then Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. So you had mass out-migration of people that were no longer welcome in their own country, who knew if they stayed, were going to die. So they started going up over this huge mountain. We'd set up on the top of the mountain to help them out because it was a brutal journey. And what ended up happening is when they got to the border in Zaire at the time, they were turned away. They said, "You're not welcome here. We can't take all these refugees," because there was billions. So what we did was we set up a field hospital, a very large hospital, and as people came through, they could stop at our gates. We went in, we would screen them at the gates, see what they needed. A lot of them just needed hydration, so we had a huge wing for just hydration. But I mean, we were also seeing the victims of the trauma and the war, and you know, 80-something-year-old man showed up with a machete sticking out of his head, right through his eye socket, and missing 4 fingers on his hand. So he put his hand up to block machete, and it cut through, and it stuck in his head. And then the guy couldn't get the machete out, so the guy who hit him left him there with the machete, and we had to come in, and then we treated him. And actually, we removed that very old school grab it and pull, and we cleaned him out, cleaned up his socket, and dressed him. And he came every second day for 3 months to get his dressing changed. And when we finally left, he was one of the crew out on the road waving us goodbye. Just had his little black eye patch on, still alive, still kicking. So yeah, so I was one of we had 6-person detachments, so like a little medical team. And I got there. I was brand new in the unit, brand new to medicine, brand new to everything. So I was number 6 on the list. And when I left, I was number 2, because the last year's training had been so in depth and so informative and so thorough that when we'd have to go and do stuff, I'd be like, "Oh, I did this 3 months ago on a dummy. Let's try this on the real meal deal." And then I would have the younger guys, that probably had 5, 6, 7 years in the trade, who had never been trained to do this and had never experienced before, coming to me and say, "Well, how do you do that IV cut down? How do you get that tendon back into place?" And then so I share the knowledge and very quickly climbed up to Det 2 IC. And my IC, Tim Ralph was his name, extremely talented guy. He taught me so much, and he's now the gentleman who brought the PA system into Canada, and he sits at the head of the board, or did, and he was a driving force behind getting retired medics work in the civilian world and get their accreditations recognized. Because the military won't recognize your accreditation. So you go do the training. They don't say, "Here, you've graduated medicine. Here's your military ticket," but also you're qualified in the civilian world, because everybody would leave the military. Civilian world pays way better than the military. We get garbage. So they would keep they wouldn't give you any designations. You just had to take your experience. And then when you got out, it was up to you to figure out how to take that and roll it over into the civilian world too.
I got to say, my mind's a little blown. So you do your training course, and you're working on dummies like you do in any training course, theoretical, and then you're in Africa during a civil war, seeing, very intense injuries.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was the...
So a lot of people struggled. Rwanda had one of the highest rates of mental health injuries for military members afterwards. I think we went over with my memory's not great, but it was in the ballpark. 250 people went out of my company, and I think we had like a 94, 95% injury rate, mental injury rate after that. My debt was 6 person, and we were all guys, and we were all. So I was ex-armored, and so armored is a combat trade. Infantry is a combat trade. Artillery is a combat trade. There's several combat trades out there, and they breed a tougher, a little bit more rough around the edge soldier. You got to, if you're going to live in a hole for 3 days and then pick your 80 pounds on your back and walk 12 kilometers and dig another hole to live in it for 3 days, it's not a conducive to soft hands, you know? So we were a tougher crowd. And in our detachment, there were 4, we call them retreads. When you change trade, it was a little joke we had, but there was 4 retreads from combat arms. And we were not discussing our feelings on a regular basis. That's not how we roll. But very quickly into Rwanda, we realized this is way bigger trouble than we had anticipated. And you could see what was happening around us. People were breaking down. It did not help that our leadership had no experience doing this before. So they actually put us on an 8-hour on, 8-hour off rotation. Now, if you have 8 hours on, 8 hours off, 8 hours on, 8 hours off, that means one day you're working mornings, the next day you're working evenings, and the next day you're working nights, and the next day you're working mornings. It was so, they were burning us out mentally from not having a 12 and 12. You should have done 2 weeks a day, 2 weeks of nights, 2 weeks a day, 2 weeks of nights. You probably could accommodate that. But the way we did it, it was, they poured gasoline on the mental fire that was raging. So we realized very quickly that this was taking place. And what we did was we got together as a crew and our little clique and said, you know what we're going to do at the end of every shift? We're going to go back to our room and we're going to sit around in a tight little circle and we're going to talk for 5 minutes about what we experienced that day. And if you need to cry, there's not one person in this circle that is going to give you grief for that. And this is 93, 94, 94. 94, it was not acceptable for a man to cry. So we did this in our thing, and everything was best kind. So one guy did not participate, and he had a lot of trouble when he came back to Canada. He was really, really messed up for a long time, and I'm still really good friends with him now, and I talk to him frequently. And he's okay now, but he had to go through a lot. The rest of us also had trouble when we came back. You can't see things and not unsee them, but our mental health, like we were able to just go right back to work and carry on, and without the obvious immediate problems. Because at the end of the day, if you buried a 2-year-old child, we had a cemetery up back with there was 60 or 70 people buried in it, and they all died, while we were caring for them. And so you go back and you go to your tent and you talk about that kid and how it was dealing with the parent, because mom's bawling her eyes out, baby brother and sister bawling their eyes out, and you're the one got to tell them that baby's not alive anymore. And then you arrange with Padre to have a little ceremony and go down to the thing with the family and bury the child, and that's it. We carry on the next day. So we would go and download all that amongst our own little group, and then you could go to sleep, and you would sleep.
Releasing the pressure.
Yeah, it was. We didn't do a full bleed off, but enough that we got through the whole tour and were able to carry on with life. I mean, I struggled later on in life with some of the things, but at the time, I think it saved a lot of us in that little detachment, because the way it worked out, it was so weird. We actually got questioned at one point in time if we were not like helping people along to die, people who were suffering, people who were in pain, because our 6-person debt was one of like 14 or 16 detachments that worked shift work in different wards at different times. But we had like 80% of the deaths for our 6 crew. But what was happening was the crew before us would be looking after somebody who should have died 2 days ago, and they would be in pain and they would be moaning and then we would do the handoff, the changeover, and now we would take ownership of the ward, and then you go do your rounds and check on everybody, and he would have passed. So a lot of these were of no nothing that we did. A lot of times our hands didn't even touch the patient, and they were just they passed away when you went and did your first rounds. But that was your mark on your team that it did it. And we actually got questioned on it. And we were like, no. If anything, if somebody was at that point, we would work 10 times harder on that person, say, than the person next to him who was in for a broken finger. You know what I mean? But it was definitely interesting. How I dealt with it was probably different than everybody else because I'd come off the Super Threes and I had been trained in everything we were facing, and nobody else had. Nobody, even like my boss hadn't been trained, our sergeants hadn't been trained, our warrant officers had no. My warrant officer came up to me on day one and he patted me on the shoulder and he said, "I feel bad for you." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "You're brand new in the trade and you're peaked." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You are never going to be in a position where you're going to do what you're going to do on this tour ever again. This is an anomaly. I've got 30 years in the military, first time I've done it. And if I get 30 more years, I'll never do it again. It'll never come up." So he said, "Enjoy it, like make the best of it." Enjoy it's probably not the right term, but you know what I mean? And make the best of it and learn what you can learn, but understand that this is not what we do normally. And 3, 4 months later, everything that I did, everything I took on, I was like, "I know how to do this. Oh my God, I know how to do this." And the third and fourth time I'm doing it, I'm like, "I'm actually really good at this." So I developed my skills, I learned them, and as compassionate as I am, as empathetic as I was, I understood the person that I was working on was in pain and I felt for them, but I also understood that I'm A, helping them out, and B, developing a skill set that the next person that I face like this, I'll be able to treat better and a little bit better and a little bit better as I learn and grow. So I had a really good attitude while I was going through it. There were a lot of ups and downs because your mental health takes an absolute shit kicking when you're in that position, especially when you've been working on somebody for days or weeks and then they end up passing away. So it's a very negative thing. Um, but all in all, I think the fact that we got together every day and looked at what we were doing and talked about what we were doing, that had an impact on me just from the, hey, you know what? There is a lot to be said about sharing when you're going through a struggle. And, and then my skills that I developed from that, I took, and from 94 right up until 2003, when I left the medical trade, I mean, 96, 97, 98, I ran my own treatment room at the Royal Canadian Dragoons out of Petawawa. And it was unheard of. I was just a young corporal medic, and I was the guy. I ran the treatment room. The doc sat back and he did his thing. I would screen you, diagnose you, write you a prescription, do everything up, tell you exactly what you needed to do to get yourself on track. I took that information, I went into the doctor's office, and I said, "Paul, I got a 28-year-old guy here. He presents with this. I think it's this. This is what I want to do for him. This is the prescription I want to read, and I want him to come back in 3 days for a follow-up." And he would look at me and go, "That's exactly what I would do." And he put his initials on the paper, and it saved him so much time, and we could put people through so much faster. And I really, really enjoyed it. So when they changed the rules and stuff, I actually considered going into medicine full time. But I was at the time, I was like 29, 30 years old. And I looked at how long it would take in university, what kind of commitment that would be. And then I ended up changing my mind. And
Would there be a fast track?
um, you could go into the nursing program and take 2 years to get your nursing degree and then go into medicine after that. But there's no guarantee for that. There was nothing out there at the time that would fast track anybody with that skill set because, like I said, the military does not give you any civilian qualification or credentials. And even if you were to go to, say, MUN medical facility, they're not interested in you fast tracking anything. Yeah. They want 7 years of tuition. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, you went to Rwanda,
Now it has changed now. Like I said, like now the PA program is being recognized. There's a huge exam to write to become a PA, even in the military, and it's not easy to pass. So once you get that now, you can easily roll out of the military as a physician's assistant and go into the civilian world as a physician's assistant. But that was a long and painful road for that team to build and put the grassroots down so that the people today can do it. But I'm well past that now. I think I could still suture you up, but it might be a little sloppy now. Yeah, yeah.
You do a lot of camping, so you might get a call. So how long did you serve in Rwanda for?
Rwanda, we were there, I think, 5 months. I went in advance party. I volunteered to go advance party because I was single. And I always do that if I'm not in a relationship. I'll go advance and I'll stay late because I want to see the married guys spend as much time with their family as they can before they go and when they come back as early as possible. So I went over, I think, 2 weeks earlier, and I was there a week, 10 days longer than everybody else. But yeah, it was about like 4.5, 5 months in total.
You are.
Don't let that get around. There's a lot of people out there that argue that.
So did you deploy anywhere else under the medical?
Yeah. So in '97, I was working at the RCDs as their medic, and the local infantry battalion was scheduled to go into Bosnia in '98, and they were requesting medical support staff to go with them. So at the time, I was a long time ago, I was in fantastic shape. I was doing Ironmans and I would run 10K before breakfast, before I went to work. And the first thing we did at work in the military was we did PT, physical training. So we might go for a 3 or 4 kilometer run. But much like grade 5, you teach to the lowest level because you don't want to leave anybody behind. We would run to the lowest level. So I'd be like shuffling my feet for 5 kilometers going, this is ridiculous. So that's when I started doing stuff beforehand.
Yeah, we were talking about the next place you served after.
Oh yeah, so sorry, for the listeners, I have trouble with memory from Rwanda. What ended up happening was I was in phenomenal shape. The infantry requested a couple of medics to go, and my medical leadership always sent me everywhere. So even though I was a medic in Petawawa from '94 till '97 before I'd start training for the deployment to Bosnia, I was very rarely in our own unit lines. I was always the medic they sent to somewhere else because when the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery were out in the field for 3 weeks and everybody had their 60, 70 pound backpack on going wherever you're going, I had an additional 40-pound medical pouch on the front, and I actually found it easier to walk because it didn't lean forward. It kind of balanced me out, but I could carry all of that gear and keep up with their guys. So they were always reporting back to us, man, you second field ambulance guys, you guys are checked out. You guys can keep up and blah, blah, blah. And here I am around all these different places. There was only like maybe 6 or 7 of us that were like constantly in that good shape and competing in the little military competitions and stuff. But they sent us everywhere. And so I went to Bosnia with the RCR in '89. Sorry, 98, and that was the first half of the year. I got back in late June or early July, and I was home for maybe a week or two. And the way it's supposed to work is once you have a deployment, if you deploy into a hostile area, such as Afghanistan, you're not allowed to deploy again. I think it's a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And that's for your own personal mental health, family, quality of life, and whatnot. But at the time, they were starting to realize because early '90s Bosnia was a two-way range. The guys were getting shot at. They were returning fire. There was a lot of hostilities there. But by '95, '96, it was starting to really calm down. And by '98, we had changed from a peace enforcement to just a peacekeeping mission. So there was no more fighting, and it was a fairly relaxed tour, other than there were landmines everywhere. So I worked with the engineers over there. Actually, one of the reasons I chose engineer later on in life was I enjoyed the guys so much. They were very, very knowledgeable, very professional while they were working, and they were a bunch of orangutans. They're animals when they weren't working. I was like, that's perfect combination for me. That's right up my alley. So, no, I went over there. I did my 6 months in Bosnia. I came back. I was back about 2 months or 2 weeks, and Hurricane Mitch had flattened Honduras in '98, the end of '98, in the late summer, fall. So they came to me and one other guy, Ron Anderson, a really good friend of mine, a great medic, great human being, and we were both still at Second Field Ambulance at the time. And they said, "You guys got experience with humanitarian missions and being around a lot of death. And I know that you just got back from Bosnia, but would you be willing to sign a waiver and go to Honduras and help out? And I was like, sure. And how He said, oh, it'll only be a couple of weeks. So I jumped on a plane. We flew down to Honduras and trucked our way in. And I was in Honduras until almost Christmas. And that tour was a bit of a, well, the Toronto Sun headlined that mission as DART misses its mark. So we had this a name, DART, Disaster Assistance Response Team. So after Rwanda, we realized how much we had to pull together to go there. We, in the military, somebody decided that we're going to have a warehouse full of this stuff that when these missions happen, we'll just load the airplane from here. And we don't have to, we know what's there. We know our inventory, we know, and it can be a very quick response. So when we were called in days after the hurricane, it actually took us like 3 weeks to show up on site. It was a complete shit show. And this doesn't happen today. It's a much more streamlined thing today. But back then, it was the first actual deployment of the DART, and it didn't go great. So we ended up getting there, showing up, and even the dead bodies, for most part, had been cleaned up and buried, and people were going back to their regular life. But it was a military deployment, and we had gone, so we stayed there to make sure that we, did everything that we could do. We did a lot of missions by helicopter in remote areas, looking after people and making sure that we did the best job that we could do under the circumstances that we had. And we had just switched our air fleet from twin Hueys to the Griffin. It's basically trading in your Chevy Sierra 2500 heavy duty for a Canyon. It was the Griffins. It's a nice machine if you're a general and you need to be flown into lunch somewhere, but to go to the field and take 4 men and all their gear, take them somewhere. We were able to bring like we would take 3 or 4 medics, and we could carry like an extra 100 pounds of gear. And 100 pounds of gear when you're dealing with 15, 20, 30 people in a village that are injured, you're out of supplies in an hour. So I really miss the old twin Hueys, but that's it. No, we went and we did that for a while, and then the tour was a good tour, but it wasn't it wasn't a Rwanda or Bosnia. We could have been better if we had gotten there a few weeks earlier, but that's in the past, and that's been worked on and fixed up.
So, what was your transition from medic to engineering?
So in 03 ish, when the incident happened with the warrant officer and the Sudafed, I went over to the actual medical staff there in CFS St. John's to fill up my med bag because we were going on a trip out to the field with the engineers here in town, and then half the stuff that I requested I was denied. So when I found out that now I wasn't entitled to use this stuff or carry this stuff anymore until you had the pharmacy course, and you're never getting the pharmacy course. Like you got to be you got to be 20 years in the medical trade before they'll consider you for a pharmacy course. The pharmacy course is 2 years long, and I just looked at that and I'm like, this ain't working for me. And when I went and talked to my boss about it, he suggested I come in and join them, and he could probably pick up some little office job for me, something in finance or logistics or something like that once I get my commission. So I did that, and I actually did a little finance gig for the boss for about 6 months while we, even though we're a military organization and we have military finances, we do have a small, not small, but a bit of money for, for inside the unit for our people and different stuff like that. And these books had not been balanced in 10 years. They were terrible. Like anybody who was any kind of professional accountant would look at this and go, "You guys are either embezzling money or you're grossly incompetent." Like it's one of the two. It was from year to year. So I went through it, and I went back through 10 years, and it took me 6 or 7 months. I think I came within 17 cents of balance. It was like 17 pennies that I could not account for, and I dropped the books on my CO's desk, and I said, "Here you go. It's all done. Everything. If you can forgive 17 cents, then we're golden." And by the way, I quit. And he said, "What?" I said, "I am never doing this again. I've been sitting behind a desk for 6 months with a calculator. I feel like the guy in the back room of the Vegas casino just counting cash. Like, it's ridiculous. It's not what I want to do. I want my boots dirty. And he said, "All right, well, we'll give you a troop. We'll make you a troop commander, and so you'll have a good sergeant next to you who knows the trade. He'll teach you, and then eventually you'll go through." So when I started taking the troops out to the field, I enjoyed it. It was fun. I learned a lot, but I also had a lot of experience as a young corporal growing up through the combat arms trades. So as I was getting up higher in the trade and I was learning from the top down, I actually remember the day where they collided. We were out on a recce of an area, and we were going to do a what we would call a harbor, where we bring all our equipment, all our people, and we kind of hide in the woods for a day or a week or whatever it is. And as a young armored guy, I learned harbor drills, how to go out and circle and mark the areas and ground guide all the vehicles in, but I never knew why. I never knew what we were doing there. Was I was nobody. Nobody told me anything. Just you got 4 vehicles, park them where we tell you to park them, and then cam them up so you can't see them. And forget the fact that the Americans have got infrared that'll count the hairs on your chest. We're putting up our little green cam net over our scorching hot leopard tank or whatever it is. Like, yeah, I think they can see us. But anyway, we I got into that, and um, I I think I was maybe 2 years in doing the troop stuff when the opportunity came up to deploy to Afghanistan. And I'd already had deployment experience, but I had no deployment experience in a leadership role and had no deployment experience as an engineer. So I went over in January 2007, and I stayed there for 6 months or so. I think I came back on a Tuesday, and I got married on a Saturday. And I had arranged it all from overseas, almost all of it. I just got the venue and got the decorator, and took care of most everything, and showed up and did that. And then because I had the combat experience, and as an engineer, I had the deployment. My commanding officer he was not doing the best from a mental health point of view, because he had been involved in something very terrible that happened in '85, and they hadn't been, there was no hand holding back then. It was suck it up, buttercup, and carry on. And he had been sucking it up for the better part of 20 years, and he needed something else. So he was getting ready to leave, and without much notice, and they needed someone to fill his position. And here was this young Captain Nolan, who had deployment experience, a big rack of medals on his chest from his non-officer life, and had all the courses. So I got back from Afghanistan. I was only home a week or two, and they called me up and said a position is open for the AOC out of Halifax, which is the Army Operations Course, or what it used to be called. And it was the course that a captain needed to get promoted to major. It was like 9 or 10 months long, and you had to fly to Halifax every second weekend for 10 months to do the course. So I said, okay. And I did the first couple of month or two, and I had to come off my leave. I didn't get my vacation time after Afghanistan, your unwinding time. I had to make the call, is it career or whatever, and talked it over with the wife at the time, and we agreed it would be good for the career. But then I found out you also need the commanding officers course, which is every second weekend in Halifax for like 6 months. But because I was on both courses, they usually do them both at the same time. But I ended up being what you'd call the center of gravity. I was what was needed on both courses. So they had to switch and run the course every weekend. One weekend commanding officer, next weekend AOC. So I flew to Halifax something like 41 weekends in a year. Yeah, I was on first name basis with everybody in Air Canada. It's crazy. So I did that, and when I came back, Mike retired, and I took over from him as the acting commanding officer at the age of, I want to say, 39 or 40. And my plan was to be commanding officer when I turned 55. It was nuts, because at 43, I was like, what do I do from here on in? So that's when again, right place at right time. I then transitioned I was at a Military Family Resource Center fundraiser for wounded warriors. My construction company had bought a table, and I was their military guest. And that day, that Saturday, I was smothered. I don't get sick very often, but when I do, I get the man flu. I was to the point where I was like, I can't go to this thing tonight. First of all, I'm going to make everybody sick around me. And second of all, I'm not fit. I'm not fit. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, this is like $200 a plate. They have bought 10 plates at this table, of which I'm one of them, that they paid for. How can I not go? So I took every Sudafed and cough pill and everything I had in my medicine cabinet. I ate it all in one go. I put on my best scarlet red dress uniform and I went and I entertained that table. And I'm a pretty social guy when I want to be. And I had a lot of good conversations, a lot of chit chat with them. The women were all drinking red wine. They only put one bottle on the table, and I went up and bought 3 bottles of wine from the table and brought it down. And this crusty old fella, Len Knox, a lot of people know Len here in town. So Len was the president of this company at the time, and I laid the wine on the table, and Len looked at me and he said, "You don't buy wine for me. I buy wine for you." And I said, "Not tonight, old man." And he cracked up laughing. And then he asked me about leadership. He said, "We got a problem managing our people. We struggle with management." And I said, "Well, there's your problem. You don't manage your people. Manage your fuel, manage your tires, manage your cars, manage your food, but lead your people. If you try and manage your people, you're pushing them around, and nobody likes to be pushed. But when you lead your people, you stand in front of them, you tell them where you're going, you tell them why you want to go there and what the objective is, and then you turn and you start walking towards the objective. And 85% of those people will follow you for different reasons, but 85 will follow you. 15 won't. Replace the 15% with people who will, and eventually you'll have an amazing team." He goes, "You want a job?" I was like, "Well, funny you should say that. I'm getting close to the end and I'm starting to get tired and I want to leave on a happy note and I don't want to look back and regret my past. Just want to, and but so I'll consider it." 2 weeks later, I got an email from him, and it was a vicious email because I told him I'd call him, and I never did. I just thought he was, just conversation over table. It didn't mean anything. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And now he was very upset that I hadn't called him, and he brought me in, and in no time at all, I was up at Phase One, Muskrat Falls, doing safety management for the company, and loved it, and really loved it. Loved the people, loved everything. It takes a while to, like any new organization, like you're not accepted right off the bat, especially if you come into a position like health and safety where you're kind of looked at as the bad guy, even though what you're doing is good and is good for people. There's times when you have to stop the schedule and you've got to stop the work and reorganize things because maybe they're not doing it the way. There's a very good chance someone could get hurt if we keep going the way we're going. Let's just change this a little bit. So you're kind of people don't like that, especially when you're in the construction world and you've got to have this done by Friday, and someone's telling you, "Well, it's probably not going to get done until Saturday afternoon now because we got to do this." You're not really welcome. But if your heart's in it and very quickly they see that you're in for the right reasons and you're doing them a solid and you're not being safety police where you're just sitting there waiting for someone to make mistakes so you can crap all over them, then you get accepted and you move on. So I've transitioned out of the military into that, and I really enjoy it.
Super. Yeah, that's awesome. Before we move on, the last question I had about your military career: what was your experience like in a leadership role in Afghanistan?
So it was very interesting. My job was was weird. So I was a CIMIC operator, and CIMIC stands for civilian and military cooperation. So there was only in Canada, I think there was only at the time like 220 CIMIC operators, and they chose people that were able to um, understand what it means to be in the military, but also understand what it means to be a civilian. Because many of the military members had been military since they were 18. They knew nothing other than military. And their attitude was, well, if I can't open that door, I'll kick that door in. That's fine when you're an infantry and you need to clear the house. But when that house is owned by the mayor and you need the mayor to help you out, if it's owned by the religious leader, if it's owned by one of the council members, just the elders, when you're in a village in Afghanistan, just being old gives you a position on the elder board where your experience and your life experience, the mayor just can't go and do something. The police chief has a say. The religious leader has a say. The elderly community has a say, and everybody's got to agree to move forward. And in a lot of times, like that's a lot of red tape. It seems like, but when it's for the people, they all move in the same direction. But there's enough oversight everywhere that it cuts down on corruption. You know what I mean?
So your role was kind of building relationships.
Yes, very much so. So I would go into an area, let's say town X we knew that every time a patrol went by this place, we got hit. So I would go into town X with my small company of infantry, and I would have a meeting with the police chief or the imam or the council, and I would be like, "What do you need?" Well, the very first thing they always ask is a religious structure, which we are not allowed to build as Canadian military. We can't go and just build churches and mosques and things of that nature. That's for the community to do. Otherwise, especially when you start getting into religion, there's 5,000 religions in the world. If you start putting money into one, you're going to end up having to put money into 5,000 to make everybody happy. So we don't do that. But what we would do is, okay, take that off the table, immediately let them know that it's not part of the deal, can't do it. But what about a healthcare clinic? What about rebuilding the school that the Taliban burned down? What about fresh water? Like, where do you guys get your water? Well, we wait for it to rain and we collect it out of the ditches and whatnot. And there's other things in those ditches that you don't want to be collecting your water out of there, gray water. So I would go into a place and I could have a contractor come in and put in a hand pump water well for about $4,000 US. And I had the ability to spend $5,000 on any one project with no oversight. So if I deemed this $5,000 or less that I could put into this community that would get me buyback from the community, I would go ahead and do it. So I installed a lot of water wells in Afghanistan when I was there. It's interesting, and I'm not kidding. I remember the very first one I did. I got a call 4 days later from the police chief who said, "Don't drive down this route for the next 3 days." And I was like, "Okay." Never questioned them, never asked them nothing. Took it to the int guys who put it on the board, and that area then got marked as IED alley for 3 or 4 days. Then we would read that some cow or sheep just got blown to smithereens at this location. And we're like, well, there's the IED. And then we'd open that route up again and go. And that's what we were trying to achieve. Did it always work? No. But it did. It act as a force multiplier. And what else we would do, which was really important, is the infantry guys, God bless them all, wicked fellas and girls. When I say guys, in the military, guys is a generic term. Not today, I understand, but I'm Gen X. Guys is everybody. So the guys would go through a village, and there would be a firefight. There would be skirmishes with the Taliban or whatever. And when you're being shot at, and there's a small wooden gate between you and safety, that gate is turning into a million toothpicks real quick. So the guys would be kicking indoors and knocking stuff over and blah blah blah. And then they would do their thing. Skirmish would end. Somebody would retreat. Then we'd reorganize and carry on. So what ends up happening there is, if I came into your house today and kicked in your front door and broke the frame, and I did it in the name of peace and love, but I needed to do violence first. You know what I mean? I came in your house and I did some property damage, and I maybe drove a vehicle across your lawn and tore up some grass and blah, blah, blah. Now you're looking at a bill for $2,500 to fix your house back. And maybe I roughed you up a little bit because I know who you were right away, and I had to make sure that you were not carrying a gun or knife or whatever. Then there's a lot of hostility on your end. There's a lot of, oh my, that guy, those. Now what we've done is we've turned either a friendly or somebody who was on the fence, and we've turned them into an enemy because now we pissed them off. So we would come along now after the battle was over and after the skirmish was done, and we would come back in, and you would get a knock on your broken door, and it would be me. I understand the guys are here, and I understand that they did some damage in the course of executing their duties. And you'd be like, oh, yes, they did this, 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 and this. And I'd say, oh, well, you have two options. I can repair all of this for you at no cost to you, as good as or better than it was when you started. I can put a brand new door, any door you want. I can fix your lawn, green grass, whatever. Or if there's something else that you would like in compensation for this of an equal dollar value, what would you like? So a lot of times it was food. A lot of times it was livestock. A goat was worth a tremendous amount. And a good, large, healthy male goat, I mean, if you did $1,500 worth of damage and you gave somebody a goat, they would look at this like they won this negotiation. They're way better off because everybody there could fix a door. Everybody there can plant a lawn when there was no lawns. But you know what I mean? Yeah. So when we would give livestock, we would give some food, water, whatever it was, and the people would be happier than before the incident took place. So we were able to take a situation that was unavoidable for the level of aggression or violence or whatever it was that took place at the time, and then we could go in very quickly after that and settle that situation down, so that that person who was on the fence, who was now leaning more towards being an enemy than a friend, is now over the other side of the fence on the friend side versus the enemy. And these people would call you up afterwards if they needed something, and okay, you know what, our water well just broke, can you come and help us do that? And you go back and you help them out, and we built those relationships. So we were a force multiplier. One Civic operator would double the positive that you could do with, say, simply an infantry company. So it was a great task, and it was all rebuilding. It can be very frustrating when you build, a little clinic or a little school, and then 2 weeks later, the Taliban would burn it down again, and we'd go back and build it up again. Sounds crazy, sounds stupid, but you can't you don't know who it is that's doing it, so you only thing you can do is just look out for the people and try and do.
Is there a fear or a process to flush out if someone you were meeting with was actually a friendly or
No, they were good. They were very good. We had a Civic operator in, I think, 2007. Captain Green, I believe his name was. He took an axe, little hatchet to the head. He almost died in a very important meeting with important people, and a young 15 or 16-year-old boy that had been offered a lot of money for his family to hurt a Canadian soldier, pulled a hatchet out right behind him and struck him in the head. When we go and meet with high-ranking people in the village, it's considered very. It's a faux pas to have your helmet on and have your sidearm with you and stuff. They look at that as being very hostile. So if you go in and sit with somebody, I would always first apologize for my attire and the weapon. And I would set everything down by my side. I'd make sure that anything that was pointing at me, not at anybody else. And I'd take my helmet off, and you would be as much like them as you could possibly be in the environment that you were in. So Green had been sitting there, and he got struck by the hatchet, and he got air medevaced out. And it was years later. He was getting his speech back, learning the rewalk and all that sort of stuff. So there was a lot of angst, a lot of fear, but there was also that stuff kind of takes a back door when you have a mission and you're a soldier, so you're going to do your mission, and B, when you start seeing things pay off, like putting in a well and then getting the phone call that warn you not to go down the street or not to do this, you start thinking, I'm making a difference here, and I'm willing to put myself in whatever position I might find myself in for the betterment of everybody else that's on the ground. Because that also they will do that for you. They will have your back too.
yeah, that I never even knew that role existed. That's
No, most people don't. Most people don't know about it. Yeah.
so you transition out of the military, you start your new career. Um, have you noticed in your long military career any changes that have happened over time?
In the military? Yeah, well, I mean, our military today is in a very, very bad state. Um, we have allowed the societal cultures, the a lot of people throw around the term woke this and that, and it's a silly term. I think there's a lot of reasons why we've been pushing, what certain groups have been pushing certain things and whatnot. But I look at police officers, firefighters, paramedics, doctors, nurses, military. There's a standard that you need to achieve, and that there's level of professionalism that must be maintained. And what we've done in the military in an attempt to boost our numbers, to kind of make the new generation more to warm up to military services, we've allowed a lot of this, what I look at as pure nonsense, to bleed into our military culture. So, I remember 3 or 4 years ago seeing a picture on a parade square where there was a person standing there. There's 3 or 4 people in uniform on parade on a parade square, and then the fifth person was wearing a dress and high heels with a huge beard and blue eyeliner. And I thought to myself, you know what you want to do with your life is nobody's business but your own. And if that's what makes you happy, best kind. But on a military parade square, there's no place for this. In a military parade square, you wear a military uniform. And when you're in a military parade square, you are a military member. And you are putting forth an image and projecting a unified something that is supposed to be better than me and you sitting at home in our houses, because they're the ones that are looking after us. They're the ones that are protecting us. And when I saw that, I really lost all respect for military leadership at the time. And I know that the guys like Rick Hillier were so opposed to this and where we're heading and where we're going. And Rick has been very outspoken recently as well as to what's going on with the military and what we needed to have. Because I worked for Rick. He was our brigade commander in the 90s up in Petawawa. Then he was, our general when we went over to Afghanistan, and he was crazy. His memory was, I've never seen it alike. I met him in 97 or 98. I was doing medical coverage on a brigade snowshoe march. So you got thousands of people on snowshoes walking by. He walked up to my ambulance. He spoke to me for about 2 minutes. He asked me where I was from. I told him Gander, where my parents were from. I had 9 brothers and sisters. I was one of 10 kids, and that was it. And off he went, carried on. And just talked to everybody like that. It was, I want to say 2004, 2005. I got off a plane in Fort Hood, Texas. I was down on training exercise on an exchange with the Americans. And who was standing on the tarmac greeting the plane? But Rick Hillier. He was down there on a training thing for himself. And I got off the plane and he goes, Rick Nolan, Gander, Newfoundland, one of the 9th of 10 kids. And I'm looking at him like, you got to be shitting me. This is not possible that you have a memory like that. That's impossible. But that's how he got to where he was. But no, he great guy, and when I look at it now, I know that they're starting to make some more changes back. They're reversing a lot of decisions that they've made.
I have some friends that currently serve, and I mean, it's a turnoff for people if you want to serve, and it's a certain type of person that wants to serve. They're not afraid to get their hands dirty. They're proud of being Canadian.
Yeah. So this is how this whole thing kind of blew up on them, because they thought they would increase the recruiting numbers by allowing more flexibility and more of the civilian world and civilian life to go into the military setting. And what ended up happening was, yes, they did bring in some newer, younger soldiers, but a lot of older, seasoned soldiers were like, this is bullshit, I'm leaving. And then they had more of an outflux problem than they had anticipated. And I mean, let's face it, if you got 20 years in the military, you can get a job anywhere, because most employers out there, if they know that you've done what you just did and you've got a couple of tours under your belt, even if you don't, if you worked in the finance world and you sat behind a desk in Borden or Petawawa or Calgary or Edmonton for the last 20 years, they know the kind of financial shit show that you've seen with pay and with flights and with this and that. And they know that you can handle pretty much anything that's going to happen inside your company ain't going to be anywhere near as bad as what these guys have seen in the last 20 years. So you're getting a job.
Working under pressure.
Yeah, all of that stuff, stress and whatnot. So yeah, there was a large amount of people leaving and very little people coming back in. And yeah, so now they're looking to kind of reverse
it. It has to change, if they want to.
And I don't want anybody listening to think that I'm anti this or I'm phobic that. That's not the case. If you're a firefighter, if you're a police officer, then you've got to be held to a higher standard. You have to be the person that people look to and respect. And I look at what's happened in the last 4 years with the RCMP, and I have zero respect for the RCMP right now. And the poor guy wearing the uniform who lives on the end of my street, great guy, great everything. His leadership has screwed him no different than the military political leadership has screwed the soldier on the ground. It's not the soldier's fault. It's not the RCMP guy's fault. But when you're told to, when you're told to slash bouncy castles and throw kids in a van away from their families, and you go ahead and do it, that's that's a different level of nonsense. That
It's been a frustrating couple of years.
It's a frustrating couple of years, yeah. So hopefully we can get that stuff happening.
I think it really is. You can see it, and a lot of people have been kind of forced to talk about it now. It's it was easier when it seemed like it was going to go away on its own, but
yeah.
So this I have to ask you. I have OCD, something I've had since I was a kid. You mentioned before we started recording that you've gotten rid of your OCD.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Okay. So, my detachment did talk every day at the end of Rwanda. Every day of our shifts, we download and try to process as much as you can. But there's lots of things out there that even when it's taking place to you don't really understand the impact it's going to have later on in life. And I deployed to Afghanistan as my first deployment with a child. So my son was born in '06 and I deployed in '07. I think I missed basically the first 18 months of his life because it was a year-long workup and then 6 months of deployment. And in that time, I did spend a month here, a couple weeks there, home. But for the most part, he was 18 months old before I got home, and it was home, which is very difficult. So that tour unlocked a couple of demons in the closet, we'll say. So I went over to Rwanda and I buried a lot of children, and I saw a lot of really nasty, nasty things. And of course, that sits in the back of your mind. It gets locked away somewhere. I know that when I came home, I created a little vault inside of me, and I locked everything away in there, and I wouldn't let anybody in it. And I had people call me on it. I remember a conversation in the late '90s. I was in North Bay visiting my sister and one of her girlfriends. We were sitting around talking about something very, very, minuscule, unimportant. And she asked me a question, and I dodged the question like I normally would, with a bit of humor and a bit of this and a bit of that. And she just didn't bite. She said, Richard, you have this massive wall built up around you. And when she said it, I think I could feel myself turning beet red, but I was also a little angry at her for saying it because it wasn't something that was within my control. But also, she was the first one to call me on it. I knew it was there, but nobody had ever been smart enough to pick up on it before because I always win them over with humor. I always leave them laughing. And she said that to me, and it really kind of bothered me, and it bothered me for a long time after that. Then Noah was born, and when I went over to Afghanistan, I remember driving down the road. I was in an RG-31 armored four-wheel vehicle, and basically a blast-proof vehicle. And I was looking out the window, and there was a small child, probably 3 to 5 years old, and he was bathing in gray water in the ditch. So gray water is what you would call water, like for us, water that comes out of your kitchen sink that's full of fat, grease, soap, whatever you've used in it, and pours out somewhere. Imagine if that just poured out to a pool in the backyard, what that would look like after, a week or 2 weeks. And there's a kid in there bathing in that to clean the dirt off himself in such filthy water. And I remember thinking, I've got a kid now. Like that could be my kid in a different world, in a different, universe. And it stuck with me through my whole tour. And so when I came back, we had to fill out this questionnaire. First and foremost, let me say, after Rwanda, we were supposed to be looked after. We were supposed to do these checks every 6 months for several years. None of that took place. We were completely left to our own devices after Africa. Huge mistake by the military leadership. They know it. They don't acknowledge it. It's terrible. But that's how that played out. So I never got any help past that point. And it affected me greatly, and it had a lot of negative effects, even in my career-wise, financial-wise, later on, because they didn't look after us. So I'm there in Afghanistan. I see this tour's over. I'm filling out paperwork, and it says in the paperwork, "Did you see anything when you were over there that really bothered you?" And I saw a lot of shit. But nothing bothered me more than that little boy bathing in that gray water, because I had one of myself now. It was my first tour with a kid. So I wrote that down, not thinking anything else of it. So they read that and they were like, okay, well, Nolan's got some problems. Let's give him the mandatory 10 sessions for therapy. And I wasn't talking to nobody at this time. That wall that I built up I did a good job on that wall. So I go in to see, what was his name now? Kurt. He's a very, very prominent guy in the city for dealing with PTSD and military and whatnot. And I cannot remember his full name, but anyway, he had me for 10 sessions. We went in and we talked about Afghanistan for 30 minutes, and then we did 9.5 sessions as we transitioned into Rwanda. So I brought up the kid, and then of course it very quickly kids led into Rwanda, and then we talked for 9.5 hours of Rwanda. When it was over, now I didn't open up to him, but I did open a little bit. I gave him a page or 2 pages, whatever I felt that he needed to hear to get check in the box to get me back to work, because my career at the time was on a rocket ship. I was going fast. I was moving fast, way faster than I should have, and probably way faster than I deserved. But I said I had all the boxes checked. So I was heading off, and I didn't want anything to get in the way of that. So I really downplayed a lot. And at the end of it, I was very thankful and very appreciative and whatnot. But I do remember thinking, I actually like this. This is a very safe environment to be sitting in this room and be able to talk, even though I'm not telling him what he needs to hear or what I need to get off my chest, because I'm still lining up to be commanding officer of my unit. I'm still lining up for all this training and all this course, all this opportunity for career and for life, financial progression, family. I didn't want to fuck any of that up. So I kept quiet about most things, enough so that I got the green light at the end of it to go back to work, and I didn't need any more sessions, which was fine. But I was not ready to go back to work or any of that stuff. So the human mind is an amazing piece of kit. It started telling me that there was way more shit going on than you've actually let on. I developed a serious fear that my own son was going to get hurt. It didn't matter what he was doing. If he'd be on the front lawn playing, I would envision a car coming down the road, blowing out a front tire, veering out of control, cutting across my lawn, plowing him down, and smashing into the house next to me on a regular. This was happening to me all the time. I would picture him going up to the park around the side of our house, but behind the house. We had a little girl live next door to us. They would go walk up to the park themselves when they were 8, 9 years old. Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. Didn't mind it. He didn't know. I was following him. I'd wait till they were just up around the corner, and then I would go up. I must have looked like some freaking creep, stalking the freaking child at the playground. But in my head, I was like, I have to be there if he gets hurt. So I was always watching everything. He was 14 or 15 before I let him ride a bicycle.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how messed up I was. And he ended up having to deal with the not knowing how to ride a bike when all his friends knew how to ride a bike, because I knew he was going to fall over and hit his head and snap his neck and whatever. So it culminated in, I think, 2012. We stopped at a local pizza shop with him that he liked in Melbourne. And he got out of the passenger side of the truck, and he stepped out onto the ground with the door open, and I physically saw this, which is, I still remember it today like it happened 30 seconds ago. A truck loses control, sweeps the side of my passenger side of my truck, smashes Noah into the grill of the truck, rips the door off of my truck, hits the curb, pops up over the curb, and slams into the side of the pizza joint, pinning Noah between him and the vehicle. And I'm staring at this, and I hear it, and I smell it, and I see the smoke, and I'm like, holy shit. And then I hear this voice, Dad, Dad. And I look over, and Noah's standing next to the side of the truck. None of this happened that I just watched. He goes, Dad, you all right? I'm like, yeah, I was just thinking about what I wanted. I got out of the truck and went in. We got a slice of pizza, got in the truck, went home. I immediately called the clinic at the military hospital here in town. I said, I need to book an appointment. I made an appointment. I came in. I saw the doctor, a civilian doctor, who I've known for, at that time, probably 12, 13 years. Even worked with him when I was a medic. And I had to fill out a questionnaire when you first go into one of these appointments. and it was the first military medical questionnaire that I filled out honestly in 22, 23 years. I just laid it all out on it. I'd already been commanding officer. I'd achieved everything I wanted to achieve. There was nothing else I wanted to do. So I said, now I can be honest. So I was honest. And old Oscar read my report and he looked at me and he said, Richard, what the fuck is this? I'm like, well, I said, I'm being honest. This is what's going on. And he said, well, he said, the psychiatrist from the Halifax hospital is going to be here on Thursday. I'd like you to go see him and talk to him a little bit. And I said, yeah, I have no problem with that. So Thursday came around, my appointment was at 11 o'clock. And this was a fluke because he only comes to visit once every 3 months. And I got him like 4 days after I went in. So it was kind of, again, everything lines up. So I went in there and I'm like, okay, much like I did with Kurt, I'm going to go and tell him the bare minimum. Whatever they feel that I might need or treatments or whatever, we'll see, and I'll play it by ear. So I went in, I started talking to him. I said, I should, probably let him know a little bit more than, because I'm at that point, and I was honest on the questionnaire. I should, let him know a little bit more. Appointment started at 11. It was supposed to be over at 12. At 12, he called the receptionist and said, I'm going to work through lunch. And at 1 o'clock, he canceled his 1 and his 2 and his 3 o'clock. And I sat there from 11 until 3:30, quarter to 4. And I told him everything. I don't know what came over me. I don't know what happened. I remember at one point in time, almost in the fetal position, bawling my eyes out, Kleenex. He just sitting there scribbling notes down like absolute savage. And when it was all over and done with, I felt about 50 pounds lighter. And I was a mess, obviously an emotional. I'd opened up something that hadn't been opened in a long time. And I let it out. And he immediately said, you got to go into therapy right now. I'm recommending medication. I'm recommending all of this stuff. And all I kept thinking was, I got to make myself better because I got, at the time, Noah was like 6 years old. And I wanted to be a dad for him. I wanted to be around. And I'd seen too many people who were piss poor dads and who were no longer around because they didn't take that effort. So I started taking medication. I was in therapy. I think I was going twice a week for a long time. And I owned it. I went into it and I said, you know what? I got all this stuff. And it's not just military, there's all kinds of other stuff. So I just started telling my therapist everything. And after a year and a half, the medication was having all kinds of adverse side effects. I didn't like them. But it was a bridge between 2 points. And I felt like I'd crossed that bridge. And while I wasn't at the end of my path yet, I was across the bridge that I needed medicine for. So I asked to go off it. And then, of course, they can't say no to you. They recommended not to, but I took about 3 or 4 months and I slowly weaned myself down to get off it altogether. Kept going with the therapy. Therapy kept going well. I had a divorce thrown in there through this whole thing, which was really bad timing, but because it was not fun. But I got through it. And during the course of the therapy, when I was really starting to personally reach inside me and tear that wall down and let everything that was in there out, turns out there wasn't very much in there. It sounds crazy, but sometimes when you're going through something and you think it's horrific and you think that this is trauma that I don't ever want to talk about, when you go and you tell somebody about, I buried this kid, or I took a bullet out of an 8-year-old, or whatever it was, once you say that out loud, that's no longer inside of it, right? It's gone. And in very short order, I mean, I used to have, when my laptop was on my desk, my laptop was, the left corner of my laptop was 3 inches from the desk, and the right corner was 3 inches from the desk. Not 3.1, not 3.056. It was 3 inches. Everything was like that in my life. And I would get mad if I opened up the fork drawer and all the forks were perfectly, in a cluster, nice and spooning each other.
You should see my fork. They're all on the right. Every one of them.
No, and I feel your pain. So the more that I went to therapy and the more that I downloaded, I started finding myself in a situation where I would unload the dishwasher and I would just be like throwing stuff in the thing and carrying on. And I'd go back and look at it afterwards, and there'd be a second or two where I'd be like, "That's not right. That don't look right. That's messy." And then I'd be like, "Oh, who fucking cares? What does this? How does this impact my life? It doesn't do anything." And when I let it go, um, my quality of life went from down here to up there, and it has gotten better nonstop since. It got to the point where my therapist had me coming in once a month, and then said, "You only need to come in every 2 or 3 months. Just let's just keep the success we have, keep the doors open, keep moving." And then after another year of like 4 visits in 1 year, she said, "Why do you keep coming here?" And I said, "I enjoy our conversation. 90% of our conversation now is catching up about what you've done for the last 3 years, which I'm interested in." And I said, "I love talking now. I love talking. I never liked to talk before. You couldn't get me to open up about anything." And I said, "I feel like now I'm the 18-year-old kid that I was before I entered the military. I don't feel like I'm changing. I feel like I've changed back to what I was. So I feel like I did change negatively due to events, um, but now I'm back to where I was." And I don't think you'll ever fully go back to where you were, because no matter what you go through, today's events are going to mold who you are tomorrow, right? So you are going to change as you get older. But I, I, I took what it is. I made the best opportunity that I could of it. I went into the therapy. I poured myself into it 100%. I didn't hold anything back, even the stuff that made me sound like a complete asshole. I told everything. You told everything, and that's the only way to get real, true success. And when I downloaded all that stuff, it all just, and I mean, it wasn't a year-long process to shake OCD. It was one day I had it, and the next day I didn't give a fuck about it. It was that quick for me. Yeah. And I got it. The medication, while I'm not a fan of any pills, I needed it at the time, and I used it at the time appropriately, and I got off it when I needed to get off it, when I felt I needed to get off it, and I used therapy for a much longer period of time. And the only reason I've stopped going to the therapy is because I have my therapeutic military groups. I've got a small group. Joanne and Michelle, if you're listening, we've got a 3-way chat that we've had on the go on text message for, I'd say we're into our 10th or 11th year. In 2019, the three of us went down to the Philippines to a PTSD retreat for 3 weeks. Best trip I ever took in my life. Absolutely amazing, with amazing people. I met guys from the bomb squad in OPP in Ontario. I met retired airborne guy who got dropped into the trees and broke his back. I met Navy guy who got uh, injured on a ship, and all these people had all these problems, and we all got together and we did adventures in the daytime and did these tasks that really pushed you to your physical limits. And then in the evening, we sat around and we just had a beer or had a glass of water, whatever your thing was, and then we would talk like this, just amongst ourselves. And there was no shame, and there was no embarrassment, and there was no hiding nothing. And then I after that, I realized if you're not communicating, you're not really living. You know, yeah, you're holding on to it, you're carrying with you, and it's just weighing you down. It's time to drop it and move on. And
My last question for you is, and I ask this to all my guests, for anyone out there that's listening, any guys out there that are going through something tough, do you have any advice for them to get to the other side?
find somebody in your life that you trust with your life. We all have somebody. That's somebody you might not have talked to since you graduated grade 12, or they moved away when you were 10 years old. You were best buddies from 0 to 10, and now they're not in your life anymore. Find somebody that you know that if you open up to them, they're not going to laugh at you, they're not going to belittle you, they're going to respect you, and they're going to listen to you, and start having a conversation. Because when I really started to get well, or get on the path to helping my mental health, there were nights when I needed someone to talk to. So I would go through my phone And I would look at my contact list and I would go, oh, you know what? I haven't talked to Big Fred in a while. Look at Fred called tonight. I haven't talked to Moose in a while. Look at Moose called tonight. And what ended up happening was a lot of times these people were going through hard times themselves. I cannot tell you the number of times I've called Jordan to say, Jordan, I'm really struggling tonight. I need an hour to just sit down and just talk to me about your last fishing trip. Talk to me about Keith. And I find out when I call that Jordan is actually having a fight with his missus, or he's going through a financial issue, whatever. And then the call is 3 hours long, and I'm not talking, I'm just listening. And when the call is over, you feel fantastic because you just helped your buddy out. And then you realize, do they feel the same way when they help me out? Am I actually helping somebody by letting them help me? I think I am. And once you realize that person gets as much out of helping you as you get from them helping you, find somebody out there that will listen to you and open that line of communication, and don't close it.
That's brilliant advice. It's actually, a friend of mine was telling me recently that that's how Alcoholics Anonymous started. Was these people, I think it was a lawyer and an accountant. They would go talk to other alcoholics who wanted to quit, and they were like, "We're going to quit alcohol by helping people quit alcohol."
Yeah, and the concept is sound because all every third movie out there, there's a clip of the boys and Alcoholics Anonymous and how they all work and how they get up and they tell their stories and stuff. But that's what it's about. And in that regard, a lot of times you're telling to complete strangers, but you're just reaffirming to yourself that I know I have a problem. So that's also a great way to do it. But a lot of people get uncomfortable when they're with that. You have to be like, for me now, like I can stand up in front of this mic. I could stand up in front of, well, it would never go on CBC, but defund the CBC. So I'd never do those guys. But I mean, anybody out there that is a good source of media, a good source of news, I would stand up and talk to the whole world about what I've gone through, and I wouldn't bat an eye at it today. And that comes from being at a point where I've talked to so many friends. I've had so many good people that I was able to lean on, and I love every one of them. And it's difficult now because we're getting at the age group where we're starting to lose some of them, and it's heartbreaking and sad to see it happen, but also simultaneously it gives you a little bit more appreciation for the life that you're living right now, and to get out there and start enjoying it while you still can. And I don't think I have any of my friends now at this age that are in their late 40s, early 50s, that they're all in the same boat. I mean, Wayne Rogers. Well, Wayne goes on a trip now every 3 or 4 months. He's always posting stuff. He's down in Mexico. He's rock climbing, or he's inside of a cave or whatever. And when I talk to him, he's chipper and he's happy. And he's like, it's only money. You can't be buried with it. Let's go and enjoy it now. And he's living a great life, and that's the right attitude to have.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming on.
Well,
Really appreciate your time.